Tank Davis knocks out Frank Martin in the 7th round. The guy's good. Like, he's so good, man, at timing you and calculating throughout the fight, adjusting to all the mistakes or even just the rhythm of the opponent. Frank Martin was doing very well for the first few rounds. Probably won the first 3, I would say. He was fighting well off the jab. He was backing up, escaping the ropes a lot better than he was later. Now, Frank Martin's rhythm and the way he was fighting was not changing, and that's what ultimately caused him to lose this fight. Gervonta will have a slower start, but he's so good at adjusting mid-fight. You saw this against Ryan Garcia, you saw it against so many of his previous opponents, and when the opponent is not changing anything up, he's fighting so similarly in every single round, Gervonta is eventually going to knock you out. Frank Martin's fighting very well off of his jab, but he constantly was getting backed up to the ropes and looking to exit out to his own right. Sometimes he would jab his way out of there or probe his lead hand forward just to push Gervonta off of him, but Gervonta's pressure got stronger throughout the fight. Early on, when this was working for Frank Martin, Gervonta was letting off of the pressure a lot of times until he knew how to cut off Frank Martin, fight behind his guard, keep his hands up high, and get busier with his hands. And Frank Martin only made very little adjustments, which made it so much easier for Gervonta Davis to set him up for the knockout, because Tank Davis was downloading the data, start to cut him off a lot better, using good probes off of his lead hand, so he's like extending that lead hand forward to see the reactions out of Frank Martin. And what he noticed was that Frank Martin was constantly pulling his body away and getting to a Philly shell if Gervonta was going to probe forward. But if he doesn't probe forward and leans forward instead, he sees a different reaction. Frank Martin will then pick up his guard, cover up, and there'll be openings through the center or around the side. So Gervonta Davis is doing a very good job of looking at the openings depending on the stance he takes in front of him. The lead hand probe is an initiator of some kind of an attack, right? So the left hand from Gervonta Davis is going to be quite threatening from that position, and Frank Martin wants to lean away. So it's going to cause a bit of a different opening for Gervonta Davis. So Frank Martin was going to expect the left hand to come in that kind of stance. He could move away from it, block it, and then counter back. He could do a lot of different things from that Philly shell. He can shoulder roll the left hand. There's a lot of good stuff from Frank Martin, and Gervonta knew because of the anticipation of the left hand, he caught Frank Martin when he started leaning forward instead. So notice here, he's leaning forward in front of Frank Martin, and Martin has his left hand up guarding his left side, specifically because look how Gervonta is leaning slightly to his own right while also leaning forward. He's showing that left shoulder, but also cocking back his right, which will allow him to generate more power into a right hook, which is exactly what Frank Martin is anticipating. But Gervonta still throws the punch. He uses that to set up a combination, whereas Frank Martin thought that it was going to be like a knockout blow. So he goes to guard it, the punch misses, goes right in front of Frank Martin's face. And what that does is it causes Frank Martin's guard to open up away from the center. He's splitting the guard open wide. The guard gets wider, creating a target up the center. That's where Gervonta Davis knows to land his uppercut upward through the center, which is actually something he did earlier in the fight. Notice how Frank Martin again was backed up to the ropes. Gervonta did a very good job of putting good pressure on him, keeping him on the ropes as much as possible, and he sees the opening up the center and throws the bolo style uppercut, a swooping uppercut that's entirely offensive. When you're throwing an uppercut this way, you're bringing your hand away from your face, exposing that left side of yourself in Gervonta Davis's stance. He is southpaw. That could get him caught, but he was so confident because Frank Martin wasn't really countering that much. When he was backed up to the ropes, he was mostly looking to get away laterally to his own right side. Most of Frank Martin's movements were to his right, which is into the power hand of Gervonta Davis. This is why Gervonta was not so worried about getting countered, so he would throw these bowl-style uppercuts and get very close on landing on Frank Martin. But in the finishing sequence, he sets that off of his right hook, throws the uppercut, catches him, and that's the punch that rocks Frank Martin. Any punch after this was pretty much open for Gervonta Davis to land, but he cocks back the most powerful punch he can throw. Frank Martin does not see the punch whatsoever. He's completely rocked. And notice how he's also looking slightly to his own left, away from the left hand that's coming to his jaw, and the punches you don't see hurt the most. That is how Frank Martin gets knocked out. So excellent knockout for Gervonta Davis, a very good finish. He is so incredibly skilled to be able to calculate and download the data so well against Frank Martin, even losing the early rounds, to adjust, bounce back, and find the knockout. Beautiful stuff from Gervonta Davis, man. And I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown. If you did, make sure to give this video a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which is probably going to be the podcast.